Hello and welcome to today's webinar. A few housekeeping notes before we begin. Verbal capabilities have been turned off. However, questions or comments can be submitted by clicking on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. All questions will be answered during the Q&A session at the end of the presentations. There will be several polls posed to participants. Participants are asked to respond once prompted by a pop-up screen. Also, to let you know that a YouTube recording along with the presentation and relevant reports will be available and posted on the IAA website within the next day or so. Now I would like to turn it over to the moderator, Ashley Theophanides.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are pleased to bring this webinar to you, which is a combination between the Big Data Working Group and the Healthcare Committee. So very keen to take you through the results of the survey that we have run. As highlighted earlier, we will be sharing the reports following the webinar. We also would not be in a position to present these results and findings without the people who participated. So thank you so much for those of you who participated in both surveys and helped us get insights in terms of how data science can evolve within the actual profession, as well as supporting some of our initiatives, especially as the IAA is looking at the restructuring processes. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ashley Theophanides. I'm the current chairperson of the IAA Big Data Working Group / Time Limited Task Force. I'm also the chairperson of the Wider Fields Committee here at the Actuarial Society of South Africa. From a professional perspective, I am a senior partner at Deloitte and focus on healthcare and advanced analytics across Africa and the globe. I'm also a healthcare actuary. I'm very pleased to introduce my speakers for the webinar today. We have two speakers from the Big Data Working Group and then also a speaker from the Healthcare Committee. So very pleased to have them with us today. The full bios of the speakers will be, of course, made available afterwards and have been included in the invitation to the webinar. If I can start off by introducing Mahendra Davanji, who is currently one of the council members of the IFOA. He's also the founder and managing director of Promopa Group. He also focuses on wider fields applications of actuarial science, like data science, banking, finance, and is a very active member in our Big Data Working Group. Next, Yashika Nagpal is currently the head of data analytics for Middle East and Africa for Kigna, and has a very strong experience in data analytics, data science, and risk management across a number of areas, including banking, insurance, pension funds, asset managers, capital markets, etc., and is also a member of the Big Data Working Group. I then also have the pleasure to introduce you to Roseanne Harris, who is a healthcare actuary with a passion for education and social security. She works for Discovery Health as a health policy actuary. She is the past president of ASA, as well as the president-elect of the IAA for 2021. She is a recent vice chair of the IAA Healthcare Committee, as well as a delegate member of the IAA Health section. Just a reminder that we are going to look to have quite an interactive session today. So please, where possible, can you participate in the polls that we're going to be running. And then, of course, please just remember, we have the Q&A function. If you have any questions, please post those, and we will be looking to go through those at the end of the presentation. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce Mahindra to take us through the presentation along with Yoshika before he hands over to Roseanne. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ashley. Can we move to next slide? So today's agenda, next slide, please. So we're going to be presenting the report, which has been broken down into those 5 sections. I'm going to focus on agenda 1, that's introduction, and the 4th and the 5th section there. And my colleague Yoshika is going to focus on the 2nd and the 3rd agenda points, which is demographics and the use of data science. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So at the outset, I would like to thank the Big Data Working Group, which conceived this idea, in fact, about 18 months ago, mid of 2019. And the most important idea was to identify the facts of how actuaries are familiar with data science and what kind of usage they are doing, what's their attitude towards the data science field. That was in the early 2019. And of course, the world has changed a lot. Field of data science, big data, analytics, everything is used interchangeably. In fact, in our reports, we have mentioned that S.R. Coleman, in his notes, he mentions actuaries and actuarial science. In fact, we are the earliest practitioners as data scientists as early as 1800s. And of course, we have pioneered the use of data, math, statistics, economics, and so on. But having said that, in the modern outlook, in the 21st century, how are actuaries adapting themselves to data science field, and what are the barriers for actuaries to work in these newer upcoming fields? That's what we are going to be focusing in our survey and results. Next slide, please. So the overall survey process was followed as a standard survey procedure as the IAA follows. Of course, we shared the emails with all the IAA members across roughly around March 11th, and several working groups, sections, committees, and also and wherever relevant, members outside as well have participated. However, we would like to bring to a notice that around 1,000 people whom the survey was sent, response rate was around 12%, which is a global average and not very surprising. And the following slides are going to take you through in terms of what the outcome were. So I would like to hand over the slides to Yoshika now, and she'll take you through the rest of the section before I join you back. Over to you, Yoshika.
Thanks, Mahijara. Next slide, please. So I'll start by providing an overview of the demographics of our survey respondents. The survey was completed by 123 people from all over the globe. The respondents were represented about 32 different countries, with the majority of them coming from Asia at 40% and Europe at 34%. Over 80% of our respondents were fully qualified actuaries. This distribution of respondents was not surprising, given the profile of actuaries involved with the IAA, which was the primary target for the survey. Next slide, please. One of the key things we looked at in this survey was how much experience or exposure did our participants have to data science. So we would like to ask that same question to our audience today and to understand what their experience has been to date. So the question is, what is your level of data science experience? Option A, is it just a buzzword for you? Option B, it's not, you don't really use it. Option C, you do use it. And option D, you're a regular user. That's great. So what we have is 4% of people think it's a buzzword, 44% people haven't used it before, 30% have used it, and 22% are regular users. Next slide, please. I think this experience is quite similar to what we saw in the survey as well, where most of our members were somewhat familiar with data science. 15% declared that they were regular users, 21% were users, and 24% have tried to use data science and its techniques. However, 33% did not have any data science experience. Next slide, please. We then tried to understand this trend a bit better, and by partitioning it by various dimensions, starting by breaking it down by the age of our respondents. What this chart shows us is the percentage of our respondents by level of data science experience and age. What we found was that the youngest age group here, between 30 and 39, reported that at least 42% of the people identified themselves as a user or a regular user of data science. This was the highest across all age groups. On the other hand, the oldest age bracket of 60 and above reported only 19% of users or regular users, and this was the lowest across all age categories. This was not a surprise, as the discipline has evolved quite recently and has not been part of the actuarial study programs going back in time. Next slide, please. We also considered, how did data science experience vary by position the respondent held at the respective organization? And as expected, what we found was that staff members use data science more regularly at around 43%, compared to their managers or senior management, which was 33% or 26%. Next slide, please. Experience with data science and practice areas. Another thing we looked at was what practice areas did our respondents work in? Most people responded that they worked in multiple areas, and on average, each person worked in 3 separate areas of practice. The majority of our responses were really in traditional actuarial roles, such as pricing, risk management, reserving, and product development. And this could possibly explain why some of these data science practices aren't being extensively used, because in some of the traditional areas, we're still referring back to some of our old techniques and methods. Next slide, please. In this section, I'm going to summarize our findings of how data science is operationalized within organizations. To start with, we wanted to first understand what were the perceived benefits of data science. Why is it that organizations want to implement it within their functions? We asked our respondents to rank a number of benefits that we'd identified from lowest to highest. Lowest being number 1 and 5 being the highest. We suggested 7 possible benefits: greater insight into data, improved value to customers and business partners, identification of risks and ability to respond, enhanced financial performance, business and product opportunities, improved quality, enhanced efficiency. Most respondents believe that insights, value, risks, efficiency were the top benefits that could be achieved from data science initiative. Interestingly, financial outcomes were the lowest ranked benefits amongst possible benefit types, but often in the media, it's quoted as the most important. Next slide, please. Before jumping into the next section to present our findings on what are the main barriers to entry to implementing data science initiatives, it would be good to get the audience's viewpoint on what they feel has been a barrier for them in their organization. We've listed 4 options here. Please pick the one that you feel is the most important from your perspective. Option A is shortage of staff within the appropriate skill set. Option B is lack of system infrastructure that supports analytics. Option C, insufficient data exist to perform any analytics, or option D, data is segregated. We have the results are in. So the way the audience has responded is 42% think there's a shortage of staff with the appropriate skill set. Lack of assistant, the next one was insufficient data. The third one is lack of systems. And finally, data is segregated. That's great, thank you. This is very interesting. If we go to the next slide, please. We had similar findings that shortage of skilled staff was the most significant barrier. This was followed by lack of appropriate infrastructure and insufficient data to perform analytics. And the next most highly noted barriers were segregation of data and lack of perceived need by management. And what we found was, similar to the audience today, these observations were actually quite persistent across regions and seniority of the working position. Next slide, please. Responsibility for analytical areas. Now, one of the key things that makes data science a success is how its responsibility to deliver in an organization is distributed. What we found in our survey was over 50% of respondents indicated that the responsibility for analytical work did not reside within a single team or business unit, but was spread across the organization in an unstructured manner. This could be one of the issues why organizations find it challenging to actually have data science initiatives implemented in an organization. What we found also was in Europe in particular, that they had a more structured approach in place for analytical work, and the analytical teams were structured either centrally with a central support team or central oversight team. This is likely to be a reflection of the maturity of the markets in Europe. Next slide, please. One of the other things that is often forgotten is that to build a data science capability, it is actually a cross-functional activity, which requires a strong partnership between a chief data officer and the chief information officer. There are various areas of support that we need from IT to be able to enable our data analytics platforms. We would need support in the areas of network and data acquisition, data extraction and provision of data, and generally communication with our teams. Over 50% of our respondents indicated that they received minimal or no support for across all of these activities. And in all cases, full support was less than 10%. Next slide, please. One of the main goals of data analytics is to support decision-making. We included 2 questions that would kind of focus on this point. Firstly, are strategic decisions made in your company supported by data analytics? Secondly, how often do you foresee data analytics being a key driver of strategy in your company in the next 3 years? More than 50% responded that data analytics are sometimes used for strategic decisions. However, when we look into the future, most respondents believe that data analytics would be heavily used in the next 3 years. Next slide, please. Who is the main stakeholder driving the data analytics agenda? In responding to this question, what we wanted to understand is who is pushing this agenda in an organization. And what we found was that it was largely driven by the executive office or senior management. This, I think, is a great opportunity for data practitioners, as often you need this executive support to be able to have a good data program in an organization succeed. I will now hand it over to Mahidara to finish the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashika. So in the previous section, we understood what was the use of data analytics in the organization. This section, we will try to use how the respondents learned about data science and what tools they used to conduct data analytics. Next slide. So in terms of data science knowledge acquisition methods, So if you see there, out of 123 respondents, more than 83 were at least somewhat familiar with data science. Almost all respondents learned about data science and big data from conferences and seminars. It's around 80 of them. And through online means, online reference materials, which included blogs, YouTubes, etc., about 75 of them. And there are, however, many other outlets for actuaries to learn. But we also see that learning from actuaries and actuarial associations was much lower compared to the conferences and online materials. It also shows us that there is an opportunity for actuarial associations to push further their efforts in disseminating the information on data science, and several associations have already begun such initiatives, and that's an opportunity there in terms of data science knowledge acquisition. Next slide. Let's do a poll now in terms of understanding what software tool do you use for data analytics? We've just used about 4 popular ones right now based on our survey, but let's see what's your response there among these 4. So we have used Excel, R or Python, both are similar, SAS, Power BI, that's Power Business Intelligence, a Microsoft tool. So here we go. There's a tie among our audience between Excel and R and Python. So that's quite different. Can we have our next slide, please? Yeah, so in terms of the tools used by our respondents, if you see there, most of them used Excel. And it was followed by R, and then finally Python. So R and Python combined would have been more, but then Excel dominates. So, and of course, SAS, Power BI, and most of the softwares don't even fall in the picture. And the related analysis actually shows that most of the respondents were from either very senior position or they were in the junior level. So by years of experience, okay, there's a, okay, so what we are seeing here is that some of the, we've not been able to embark all of those softwares, but only 4 of them. And if you see, okay, thank you. I had gotten information from Annie. Thank you very much. I can proceed. Sorry. So perhaps most senior management professionals, they've been using Excel for decades now, and they're most comfortable using Excel. And many of the younger actuaries who have just come out of university are only focusing on tools which they have learned in their university or college during their formal actuarial training, like R or Python. So that's from work position perspective. Next slide, please. So if you look at it from age perspective, it's not much different. If you see that people in their 30 and 39, they're the people who've been using and exploring most of the tools using R and Excel and Python. Having said that, there's majority of people over 60 who are exploring new tools. If you see the number of people who have been exploring newer tools are mostly under 30 and 39 years. But there are senior people also very, very interested in the new tools, which we see. Next slide, please. So when we look at the kind of techniques which people have been using, so if you see the traditional actuarial techniques such as regression techniques, GLMs, data visualization, and they are the one which have dominated. Maybe this can be correlated that a majority of the respondents were from traditional actuarial domains who participated in the survey. But however, we see that the majority of the participants also showing some interest in the novel techniques like neural networks or even other support vector machines. And we see that there are similar kind of response across the globe, European or the Asian respondents or so. Because we had very few respondents from the Americas, but the region-wise, there was not much difference. Next slide, please. So there's the same with respect to the work positions as well, as you see. And we can clearly see that consultants and senior and management and senior management all still used similar techniques as data visualization, GLMs, and regression, and very little support on the support vectors, social network analysis, and neural networks. Next slide, please. Also had opportunity for audiences or the respondents to provide their feedback on what they thought in terms of use of data science techniques. And many of them mentioned, and here we have a sample of few comments which are absolutely unedited. So if I were to read it out, I think that data science is very important for their actuarial work. But there's other people who mentioned there's a lot of value in moving traditional actuarial reports using more granular big data sets. I believe, quote unquote, I believe this skill set can change the way we as actuaries work with data. But there is also a cost benefit analysis that needs to be considered. Quote unquote, some of the shortcomings, like having worked with both qualified actuaries as well as data scientists, respondent mentions that especially in the cryptocurrency startup, I see limited use of data science in the actuarial field, particularly life insurance, due to the inadequacy of data, prohibition of usage from regulators, siloed IT department, lack of skills from actuaries, and limited profit potential for advanced data science techniques. There's a specific warning given that be careful, again, quote unquote, be careful about the use of artificial intelligence. It includes psychology, ethics, and many other fields. And actuaries are rarely trained in these disciplines. This means that we need to embark these skill sets into our actuarial education as we move further, as we are focusing, my views. And data science is not only about tooling, it's about communication, very important. You see communication, storytelling, and also understanding the customer awareness, and then its usage in terms of the final goal setting. That's very important. These were all the views from the participants. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, next slide, please. So what we have identified here is that we've tried to understand the attitudes of actuaries worldwide on how they think about data science, data analytics, big data, all of these terminologies which were used interchangeably, and also how they're familiar with the technologies and kind of usefulness in actuarial work. In fact, many of the respondents also shared their opinions on the benefits and barriers and adoption of what are the difficulties they're facing in adoption of these techniques, analytical techniques. Next slide, please. So we just want to mention that the members of the IAA Big Data, they're aware of some of the actuarial professional organizations, particularly those from North America and Europe, and are actually working in this area. However, because of limited participation in terms of survey, not able to capture the response from North America and the other Americas and the South America as well. However, given that we are also trying to get more responses through these kinds of mechanisms like the webinar today, we hope that such survey is important, at least on a biannual or triannual basis. And I hope the way Big Data Working Group did, future groups would focus on these kinds of surveys in terms of more frequently give feedback to the organizations and associations there. So that's it from my end. And I would like to, next slide, please. I would like to thank members of the committee, Big Data Working Group, everyone who have contributed in formulating the questionnaire, the objectives, and also the IAA staff who have helped in collecting the data. At the same time, on the report side, the report was formulated by a couple of members there. I would like to acknowledge that here. And I would now pass on to Roseanne to take over the next slides.
Thanks so much, and hello everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to participate in this discussion. What I'm hoping to do is just to bring a perspective, almost an application perspective from the healthcare space, and I look forward to questions and discussions on this. What I'm going to be presenting is the results of a survey that was conducted during the first quarter of 2019. We first presented this back in Cape Town in April of 2019, the preliminary results. And so what I've done for this discussion is just to extract a few of the relevant results for really looking at data analytics. So next slide, please. So the first one is just showing the makeup of the respondents. You can see that South Africa, my country, had a very strong showing in this particular survey, along with Mexico and the United States. I think what you will see when you look at these countries that predominantly participated in the survey is a lot of them are where expense cover is a predominant feature of their health environment, and particularly the health insurance environment. And I state that specifically in this context because of the data heavy nature of medical expense cover. Next slide. So also interesting to note, as per the previous discussion, the range of experience and age profile of the respondents. You can see here that this survey was predominantly addressed by people who are quite well experienced, so with 15 or more years of experience, and mainly qualified actuaries. And I think that's just something to bear in mind when we're looking at the tasks that these respondents indicated that they are engaged in, because often experienced actuaries will not necessarily be getting their hands dirty necessarily with the data, but they will certainly, as this previous speakers have indicated, be very reliant on those results when it comes to informing decision making. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the countries that participated in the survey, you find that expense covers are sort of the predominant feature of the health insurance market. And when we look at health insurance in general, and of course, very specifically when we look at medical expense cover, we note that the data volumes are very high. Oftentimes there is an opportunity to relate data across different data sets and different sources of data to understand that health data better. There's a large behavioral aspect, and as I'm sure you're aware, when it comes to not just health activities, but wellness and behavioral activities, which also impact on health risk. And so data analytics and data science are a key factor in terms of understanding these links. Also, the number of factors that affect health outcomes and health risk, and understanding what those factors are. If we look at the recent crisis that we've experienced across the globe in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic, analyzing that data and understanding the impact of comorbidities has been really crucial in terms of where to allocate scarce health resources, for example. So the data heavy nature of these products makes them prime candidates for the kind of tools and techniques that you have been discussing today. Next slide, please. So we asked the respondents what kind of work they're involved in, which are the tasks that they consider to be relevant for health actuaries, and importantly, where they see their roles increasing or decreasing. And you can see that this group of respondents primarily involved in product-related tasks in terms of product development, pricing, and marketing. And given what I've just said about the need to understand risk and the importance of tracking that data in real time to make sure that that risk is well understood, indicates that these tasks would be very dependent on data analytics. When we look further down the list, we see that that IT development and data sets, there's an expectation of increasing involvement of health actuaries in this space. And I think this is also a function of sort of the age profile, age and experience profile of the respondents in this particular survey. Next slide. So just to pull out, what's interesting is when we see the tasks where the role of the health actuary is increasing the most and increasing the least, because as actuaries, we always expect our workload to be increasing. So you can see there the product development ones continuing to increase, statistics, reporting and consulting, and evaluation and risk assessment. Now, when you look at the column on the right-hand side, you'll see that there's also the accounting, statistics, and reporting. And what I wanted to do here was just draw the distinction between statistics for the sake of understanding risk as opposed to simply for reporting purposes. And I think that's the kind of shift that we've seen in terms of the way in which analysis of data is being used, probably in insurance markets generally, but certainly specifically in health markets, as more tools have become available and accessible. So the ability to use that data to understand those risks better, rather than just for reporting purposes, is becoming a lot more prevalent. So you can see then that risk assessment part and the use of the statistics is bubbling up there, whereas actuaries are becoming less involved in terms of sort of the reporting and corporate activity element. Next slide, please. So we asked the actuaries then, in terms of building a health syllabus, for example, what are the kind of skill sets that they think that we should be considering in a curriculum, or in terms of guiding actuaries and the kind of skills that they should be developing to progress their career in health practice. And you can see that at the very top of that list are data manipulation skills. Interestingly followed by understanding the principles of health economics. And I think what's interesting there is that behavioral aspect. And of course, understanding the behavioral aspect does actually require data and analytics to unpack that and to separate out things like correlation and causation. As you can see, data science techniques also featuring in the midway down that chart, but still ranked on the sort of very important side of somewhat important. And so it's the data part of it rather than the clinical part of it, which is critical in terms of the way in which actuaries are working in healthcare. So I often say that in terms of being a healthcare actuary, you need to be a team player because of the fact that you tend to be working in teams with, for example, clinical and experts in health economics as well. And the real skill set that actuaries bring is that understanding of the risk. And I think that multidisciplinary team very necessarily is starting to include as well the core skill of data science. Next slide, please. So this was just showing across the different employer types these skills. You can see that the data manipulation skills feature across all the different kinds of employers of health actuaries, as does that understanding of health economics. But those practicing in insurance companies as opposed to consulting companies, much more focused on the technical component. So it's not just the kind of work that actuaries are doing, but also the kind of employer where they are doing that work that is driving the kind of skills that are appropriate and relevant. So then I think my final slide is the next one, which is just then in terms of support for health actuaries, which I think is linking to the last point on the data science survey, which was around how do we make sure that actuaries have the opportunity to build these skills. And it's interesting when we look at the question around where health actuaries look to for support and the seminars and conferences. And I'm sure if we ask this question in the last 6 months, as opposed to at the beginning of 2019, we would probably find that that webinars feature quite strongly. So these kind of events are very important in terms of assisting and supporting actuaries to build these skills. And of course, as part of continuing professional development, its actuaries are actively analyzing sort of the gaps in their knowledge and the areas where that growth will be important in terms of their own career development and supplementing the skills that they're bringing to bear in their current work. So I think that's all from me. Ashley, back to you for the questions.
Thank you so much. So firstly, thank you to the speakers, to Mahendra, Yoshika and Roseanne for the presentations. And of course, thank you to the participants in the polls. We got great participation, so thank you so much for responding. It's definitely encouraging to see how strongly correlated some of the results are. I'd also like to remind you to go into the Q&A function and post any questions that you may have, so that we can direct it to our speakers. But maybe if I can start off, and my first question is to Roseanne. So we know that there is increased focus on data privacy, the use of data, as well as the ethical challenges around how data is used. What approach and what activities is healthcare actuaries embarking on in order to ensure that the data is used appropriately, especially when it comes to providing access to healthcare?
Thanks, Ashley. I think that's a great question, and certainly a core challenge, particularly in healthcare, because the nature of the data that you're working with, I mean, all data is sensitive, but in the healthcare context, the data is particularly sensitive. And the challenge that we have, and I wish I could have an answer to your question, so let me say that the challenge that we have is, of course, that when you are linking different data sets, for example, you can only do that if you have identifiers. So the core technique, or the key technique for managing sensitive data is de-identification and making sure that we can't re-identify. But I think some of the techniques that are being used to make sure that there are mechanisms for linking data sets without necessarily breaching confidentiality are very important in terms of enabling us to sort of like harness the power of multiple data sets that we have. So it's not just about the techniques for analyzing the data, but also the techniques for managing data. And I think for us as a profession, for actuaries working in this profession, because we often debate about where does the line begin and end in terms of the actuarial role versus, say, the data scientist role. And I think these issues around judgment and around the ethical application and looking at the implications of the data, not just about what it's telling us, is really important. So I mean, I'm really glad that question's at the top of the list, and perhaps I'd encourage the participants in this seminar to maybe make some comments around what are the best ways to manage that particular challenge, because I don't think that there is a definitive answer to that as yet.
Thank you. I think this is definitely something that we'll be focusing on for many years to come, especially as we see different practice areas starting to merge into each other.
Yeah.
Just a reminder to everyone, Roseanne has again thrown out a question. So if you can use the Q&A function in order to, if you have any thoughts on how we can potentially address this, please share that with us. With that, if I can then move to another question that came from Gary Smith, just a reminder to everyone to post any questions that you may have. And this question I'd like to pose to Mahindra. So Gary's asking us, in terms of the techniques that are being used, we see that regression is well used, and we see this quite consistently. However, in terms of some of the other techniques, such as machine learning, artificial intelligence, and so forth, is not that well used based on the survey results relative to the more traditional ones like generalized linear models and so forth. Are we behind the curve?
Okay, so I think we need to look at this question from two angles. One, from the survey, and two, as a generic one. If you look at it from the survey, we have to remember that majority of the participants in the survey were from traditional domain, and they were all qualified actuaries and very senior people. At the same time, most of them were mainly from the insurance industry, and which is highly regulated. So I think when you look at from that angle, it's very apparent that techniques used like the regression techniques and all those traditional actuarial domain techniques are the most popular ones. However, if we had asked the same question, maybe to the audience here or to the broader audience, and involving more younger actuaries, we would definitely have found some more, and also more people, let's say even from the GI field. I think some of the machine learning and artificial intelligence techniques which they are using is much larger. Having said that, I think what we feel is, yes, we have to acknowledge that actuaries are behind the curve. Let's all understand, though actuaries were the earliest of the people who started working on the data, though we worked for last 200 years, we did not become that popular as data scientists who started off very late, say in last 15 years. Maybe because we're not competing with data scientists there, just collaborating with them. What is important is our legacy should not become our weakness, but then it should help us acquire more knowledge. That's what I would say. And yes, there is a lot that the actuarial associations have to do to change the mindset. It's a mindset problem rather than a skill set.
Thank you so much for that. Really appreciate it. If I can reflect on some of the questions and comments that we often get, is how do actuaries who are currently not engaged in these type of techniques, how do they get involved? How do they ensure that they skill up? And if I can ask Yoshika to answer this question, one of the things that I personally found when I started using many of these techniques was that I really had to dust off my university statistics books and go and buy a few more. So if actuaries who are more established are looking to use more of these techniques, especially in some of the more established practice areas like life insurance, how best should they approach this?
Sure. I can just reflect on my own personal experience. So I'm a general insurance actuary. That's the specialty where I trained. And what I found was, the course that I went through was focused on very traditional areas. So as my career evolved, I realized that I needed to skill up in some of these new areas that people were talking about. The approach I took was structured learning. I actually enrolled myself in a course. It was a postgrad diploma in machine learning and artificial intelligence. It was only 2 subjects. So I didn't want to have too much of a commitment because I was already working. So I undertook this 2-subject course, and I felt that really helped me, gain the knowledge that I needed. Of course, that's a very structured approach. You can, of course, go for more informal. You can go for something more informal. There's a lot of online YouTube videos, courses that are freely accessible. and seminars. I think we did a survey on this as well. One of our questions was, how are you learning, you know, these techniques? And a lot of people are learning from these webinars and through other forums like this. So that would be my advice. Look to either, you know, free sources that are available, talk to people. You know, more people are quite willing to help and share their knowledge. Or if you prefer, go the more structured route where I think it can give you the exposure that you need. I think your second part of the question was around life insurance industry in particular. I think sometimes we need to realize that these techniques are domain agnostic. I mean, the techniques we have can be applied to any domain, whether it's health, life, or GI. It's the way we frame and think about the problem. So I think we need to get into the mindset where we're learning a technique and then we think about, oh, well, how can we apply it to this specific use case?
Thank you so much. I see we have a question from Terence Narine, and this question I'm going to pose to Roseanne. In terms of the use of big data in order to model COVID-19 in the health actuarial space, are you aware of work that's currently being done that you can share?
Thanks, and hi, Terence. Yeah, thanks for the question. So, of course, there's a lot of work that's been done in terms of modeling COVID-19. But I think the best example I can give of a big data application is certainly what we've done in my organization in Discovery. The data that we had as the largest health insurer operating in our market enabled us to use those data science techniques to identify risk factors and develop a resilience index. So what we had was this resilience index that was basically a dynamic index, and we were able to then identify proactively people who were potentially at risk for hospitalization or at risk for developing complications, and reaching out to those lives to send them an oximeter or to make sure that they were receiving extra focused care. So, so I guess it's a nice example of how data science can save lives. And in fact, there has been a paper that's been written up on that, which will be published shortly. So I think that's quite a nice example of the sort of rapid use of data. I mean, it's very interesting comparing notes, for example, I mean, on that subject of the kind of volumes of data that we have currently available to the actuaries who were involved in modeling HIV 20, 30 years ago, to the actuaries who have developed very sophisticated forecasting models for COVID-19. And they're able to have done that in short periods of time, both because of the volumes of data that they have access to, as well as the tools that are at their ready disposal. And I think importantly as well, because of the opportunity for collaboration across the globe. So, you know, the fact that that we are so well connected across the world has meant that we've been able to collaborate really effectively, I think, as a profession in terms of contributing. I hope that that answers your question, Terence.
Perfect. Thank you, Roseanne. Maybe another point I can also mention is that we, as in Deloitte, have also incorporated movement data in terms of trying to assess the level of risk associated with transmission of COVID-19, but then also looking at movement data in order to assess how people are accessing services, especially in very resource limited areas, especially rural areas where we know there may be greater levels of underservicing due to people not necessarily having access to healthcare services. So I think, you know, if we had to go around the table, I think there would be a number of people who would be able to provide, you know, some information around the type of aspects where it would have been used, whether it is from a track and trace perspective, or whether it is to project the level of medicine or PPE that might be required. If I could go back just to this, I think the second part of the question from earlier, in particular from David, and I know we've had some very interesting discussions about this within the Big Data Working Group around how does regulation either promote the use of both structured and unstructured data, and how do we see this evolving in terms of how it can be used in a more transparent and meaningful way, especially when it comes to guidance and requirements by the regulator. So I'm going to open this up to Yashika and Mahindra in order for them to give their thoughts.
Hi, I think Mahindra is still on mute, so I'll start. So I think, no worries. I think some of the challenges that regulation creates is around sharing of data. And so what you'll find, a lot of these AI technologies are built on cloud platforms, which means typically the data is leaving your organization and possibly even leaving your country. A lot of this regulation is around, can the data residency, can the data leave? And if the data can't leave, that limits some organizations' ability to be able to access these techniques. Because what that means is the organization itself has to have the infrastructure available to be able to build these models and deploy these models, which can be a bit of a challenge. So that's one aspect of regulation around data sharing. Another aspect is some of these models are considered to be black boxes. So they don't have as much transparency. In particular, I think neural networks is criticized for this. So because of this lack of transparency, a lot of regulators also, are not happy that organizations use those models. They want to have a more transparent model in place so that they can understand how decisions are made, which, rightly so. But so we need to get to a point where that can happen. So transparency is another reason. Model transparency is another reason why I think regulation sometimes creates a barrier from being able to use these models. Mejara, please feel free to add.
Ishika, I think I do agree with what you mentioned, but I just wanted to add a point here that the statement was not made by the team or the working group, but it was one of the participants' view, as he mentioned that since he or she worked as a data scientist in a cryptocurrency startup and not in a regulated startup. So that's where they saw the limited use in the life insurance industry. It's a view. But the reasons why the participant gave was inadequate data in the format which a data science tool would need. Also, because there's lack of skills among many actuaries to use those new skill sets. I think those were one of the things. And I do agree with Chika. It's a black box principle as it comes to neural networks and many more like support vector machines. And what the regulation does not understand, the best thing to do is not to allow it to be used. In most countries, we've seen that in India here, for example, use of derivatives in themselves were not allowed for very long time. So, and even now, I think it's not allowed. So if you don't understand, don't use it. That's the way. But at the same time, we should be happy to know that there's something called as regulatory sandboxes, which Ishq also mentioned, which are allowing for new innovations. But I think the next decade is going to be a fintech revolution. And we as actuarial professionals lose this this wave, I think will be left far, far behind in terms of we being a profession to make any significant influence in the financial services industry. That's a personal view again from my end.
So just to also reflect on my personal experience, I worked in both regulated institutions like banks and healthcare providers. And I've also looked at a startup where I think they were just like a Craigslist. So you're listing of properties online. And it was quite different, the things that they had to think about. Data privacy is something that they didn't think about as much. They were, sending data to the cloud immediately. It really wasn't too much of a concern. However, other organizations that are regulated do have to satisfy these requirements. So the barriers to be able to adopt these initiatives and programs in your organization are quite less in some of these startup environments that are not regulated versus these institutions that have been around for a number of years.
Thank you so much. I think it's an interesting one, especially as actuaries are looking to move into more wider fields areas, Yoshika, as you mentioned, like the startup, as well as other industries, and looking at the integration between these different industries, especially when you look at, for example, organizations like big telecommunications companies really pushing more financial services and insurance-based products. It's going to become very interesting to see how one differentiates between the provision of insurance products, and of course there are license requirements and so forth that would be needed, but those lines I think are going to start to blur very quickly. Thank you. I see we don't have any further questions that have come through. So if you do have any further questions, please drop those in the Q&A box. I just want to give an opportunity now for each one of the speakers just to provide their closing remarks. And if I can please start with Yoshika.
Right. I just wanted to thank the Institute for the opportunity to present the results of this survey. It was quite insightful, the results that we saw. And what was quite interesting was how some of these findings were quite universal. If we considered Europe or we considered Asia, the experience was quite similar. I think the challenges that remain in an organization to adopt data and analytics and AI really is around, we need to get beyond the hype, and we really need to think what delivers value. I think often, people gravitate to the most shiny thing and think, that's what we need. But I think what we need to do first is have our foundations right in terms of having data stored. I think Roseanne touched on this earlier, that often, there are a lot of data islands in an organization. They're not even connected. We need to get our basics, and then so walk before you can run, get those right, and then start building those AI capabilities and start testing. And I think we also, as actuaries, we sometimes have this fear of failure. And it's interesting because startups and AI models tend to be around just test and learn, and that's what you keep doing. But I think that fear of failure is another thing that holds us back to progress in this space. I mean, that's all from me. But I think, I'm really excited for what, actuaries can bring to this space. And I really hope, like Mahidra mentioned, we really need to get on this wave, because we do have the skill set, and we need to position ourselves to be the leaders in this space.
Thank you so much. If we can then get Mahindra to provide his concluding thoughts, please.
Thanks, Ashley. I completely agree with what Roseanne and Yoshika have been speaking for a while now. And what I just want to convey to all the participants is moving into wider areas or new areas might seem quite difficult, but those difficult tasks definitely will lead to path-picking fields in the future. For example, I think several decades ago, GI and P&C GI used to be considered as a non-traditional field. And today, if you see, it's a traditional field. So, and people who moved in that era felt that, okay, it's quite risky, but for many of them, it paid off. So data science and technology is one such field. And I would also urge that actuarial skill sets are transferable beyond the insurance domain, beyond the financial services domain. And there is so much need of it, particularly, let's say, in climate change. And you need to learn to work with the professionals. Actuaries are not most intelligent species on this planet, but at the same time, bring definitely some special skill sets which can add value, and most particularly the math and the technical skill sets which can add value to any industry, be it energy, climate change, or even for that matter, retail. I think the younger actuaries, there's a myth that only younger actuaries can move into new fields. But there was a survey which was conducted earlier, and it's the senior actuaries beyond 55 years of age or 60 years of age. They were more innovative in moving into new fields and making big difference. That's in some of the countries there. So which means there's no age barrier for any of you to move into new fields. And as we are mentioning here, the entire survey was mainly to get an idea, like a tip of an iceberg. There's so much to be done, and we are still at the starting of the curve there. And we have a steep learning curve. We are at the starting series, and we need to really move fast. And I think it's just the mindset change. And we actuarial profession are a small profession, less than 75,000 people on the planet, and we can get eroded very quickly by any kind of a pandemic if it were to only spread to actuaries. So I think the biggest pandemic I'm seeing, which is spreading to actuaries, is just remaining just having a barrier to move into new fields. If you can have a right mindset, encourage others, be more entrepreneurial. If you don't find a job, that's what I did about 10 years ago. That I didn't find a job of my choice. I started my own company, and today I'm very happy it grew. And I'm telling you, there are more than thousands of such opportunities for thousands of actuaries who are here, and there's pretty much to do there. That's all I would only like to say at this juncture.
Thank you so much. So we've had another question come in particular around what research topics can the actuarial profession look at in order to move us in the right direction. And I know Roseanne is very passionate about education. So Roseanne, can you incorporate your thoughts on this as you give your concluding remarks, please?
Thanks, Ashley. That's exactly what I was going to say. You know me so well. That I think it's been really interesting being part of this discussion, and also the various discussions leading up to the webinar today, because it certainly strikes me that that education is an important component of this, that we need to give some careful thought as to not just what role actuaries can play, but how we should be equipping the actuaries of the future to be able to play that role. That actuaries, in terms of the kind of people that they are, have value to bring. And I think what's quite exciting about a discussion like this one is to see how it cuts across the different areas of practice. You know, that we can have a discussion about the techniques that are useful, which I think, to Yashika's point, also highlights the need for us to also be looking at how we can connect the data across the different areas of practice, and certainly in terms of, as Mahitra has said, to move into other areas of practice, that the skills that we have been able to understand around risk management and the use of data in supporting risk management, that can be brought into other spaces. And I think we are seeing that certainly in our market here. We see actuaries involved in some of the retail markets and even in resource markets as well. So there's a lot that can be brought to bear. So I think, yes, research and understanding this kind of research, so not just around the sort of the development of technical skills and capacity, but also the way in which they can be applied. And I think sharing the case studies So putting research into the public domain in terms of how these techniques have had practical application in risk management is very important, because we often find in these discussions that maybe some of the results are perhaps proprietary in nature and that have been applied within organizations, for example, but the learnings in terms of how this has informed decision making, which underpins some of the questions that have been used in the survey, I think will be very helpful and perhaps more broadly applicable across different fields. So yeah, thanks again for the invitation to participate in this discussion.
Thank you so much. We really want to thank everyone for joining us today, and thank you for being such great sports in completing our number of polls that we had. We found it incredibly useful and insightful. We really appreciate you joining us, and then of course being so participative in the polls. I also want to thank our speakers. I want to thank the IAA for helping us pull this together, and for doing all the organizing. And then finally, just to thank again those people that participated in both the big data working group survey as well as the healthcare survey. The results are a function of you participating. So thank you so much for that. Please have a wonderful 2021. Be safe, and let's continue to think about how we position actuaries in the future. I know that there has been lots of focus on ensuring that we manage our professionalism, we ensure that we drive the actuarial profession in the future in order to add value to the organizations and entities that we serve. But I think it's also important for us to see how we can do more, how we can get into new fields of practice, how we can dust off our techniques and add value to the work that we do, while still providing the professional aspects that we need to. And from numerous discussions that I've personally had with a number of organizations who are using data scientists to a very large extent, and in some cases are actually looking to replace some of the junior actuarial roles with data scientists. One of the things that continues to come up is the fact that we have the profession, the fact that we are well trained, and the fact that we apply our minds in terms of understanding the unintended consequences of some of the work that we do through our formal training is something that is highly valued. And I think that's something that we can take away, is that I think us having a role in the future of data science is up to us. And if we embrace that and make sure that we continue being relevant in the traditional fields and the new fields, I believe we have a very strong professional careers in front of us for both ourselves and for the new actuaries coming through the ranks. So with that, have a wonderful 2021, and we look forward to connecting with you again. Thank you so much.